Greetings, welcome to the Evidence and Reasons for the Christian Faith video channel. Let me know if my audio is coming through. I continue to have audio challenges, so I actually broadcast through two computers. Rebecca is not here live with me today. She's just a pretty face that I decided to include there. So tonight's show is just kind of slapped together. I decided in the middle of the day, I just wanted to have a little bit of fun. And thanks for the feedback, Patrick Alexander. God bless you, sir. So greetings, Patrick Alexander, Gangster Ghost, Mr. Jetty, Ben Rex, and that's all I have on the list. Heard about the McLean Bible Church case being dismissed. That may not be the end of it. You know how things can go in court. So that's about all I'll say at this point. I'm sure the other lawyers on the other side know that this isn't necessarily the end of things, and I'll just leave it at that. Greetings, Bubblegum Gun. So today's show, let me just see if I have it on the docket here. I could read it off my quasi-teleprompter here. The title of the show is Giving StupidWh0reEnergy a Better Bang for Her Buck, Part 1. So let me see. Let me just set this up so we could see some slides. One moment. What I have to do is get back on StreamYard. And get my StreamYard going here. I have too many windows open. So if you'll forbear with me until I get this resolved. It's a little aggravating. I can't move these windows where I want them to be. So apologies. So let me share my screen here. So there is a viewer who goes by the handle StupidWh0reEnergy. I don't quite know the origin of that name. I do believe it has something to do with physics, because energy can move around, and at least that's the story I hear, but it's still a funny, it's still kind of a funny name for someone's handle, especially a girl. I mean, assuming it's a girl, I mean, you never know. I do have to say that throughout my history, my time on the internet, I actually knew this gentleman, Tom English, and he would assume many personas, both male and female. And he was a pretty good actor there. And, you know, I always kind of knew that's kind of the game until I actually see and hear them in person. You never knew if the person you're interacting with on just purely through text is who they represent themselves to be. So, you know, it's always been nice when there are respected people, known names, that you get to meet in person, like say William Dembski or Stephen Meyer, and then you know these are real people. And then for a long time, people weren't really sure I was a real person until I was on the cover of Nature, and it's like, oh, he is a real person. So that's just kind of how it goes. So I will just assume, for the sake of argument, this individual is who she claims to be, and that is her picture. So people are wondering, who is she? And it's like, oh, I don't know. I'm just going to assume it's an internet persona, and I'm going to treat it like an internet persona. So how did this all come about? Well, there have been a few debates. The most notable was me and Dr. Dan in 2020, in the summer of 2020. And that's when I first encountered StupidWh0reEnergy. And she would always bring up stuff they have in the side chat what they call a SuperChat, where you can donate money. And when the moderator of modern day debate, that is James, would see it, he would take note of what was in the super chat. So what happens is, if you donate money, you get the privilege of having your comment highlighted, and he would take that and say, well, that was generous of them to donate. And they'd have the privilege of bringing their question to the attention of the guests in the debate. So now StupidWh0reEnergy kept donating money to ask me questions. And so I was like, okay, so I'm a guy and that's StupidWh0re, and she's the one that's paying money out for the transaction. And I thought that was really funny. So anyway, so she's donated probably hundreds of dollars to Modern Day Debate, not just to ask me questions, but other people. And then lo and behold, I find out, I saw her on other channels, and she would ask me very specific questions about my past. And she was going into the archives of stuff that I'd written like 18 years ago. And she knew the people I interacted with. And I'm just like, I don't know if this is the same person. I began to think, this person seems to know a lot about me, and maybe that was one of Dr. English's personas there. I have no idea. It may have been some guy that had known me for 18 years now, just taking on a new identity. I have no clue. But StupidWh0reEnergy seemed to know an awful lot about me and the things I've written. Starting in 2003 at the Access Research Network was as an ID-friendly forum. And then I used to post on Uncommon Descent. So she knew my connection with William Dembski. She mentioned it in my show just this week, where my get well message to Rebecca Davis. And so I thought she asked really good questions, by the way. And I really wish I had more time to pursue this, because sometimes, Cheryl says, I watched StupidWh0reEnergy do an almost X-rated dance on her bed once on Will Kincaid's. Also, a bunch of the guys have seen more than that. Thank you. Didn't know that. Goodness. Rebecca had worn out her voice. It's nothing serious. She just talked too much. She had she's been having these streams and being on the streams, both her streams and maybe other people's streams, for hours and hours, and her voice just kind of quit. So she had to rest her voice, and I think that was a good thing. So we are wishing her well. So greetings, Janet. God bless you. But in any case, so Mr. Jetty earlier asked, who is she? And okay, so there's a little data point. Someone who did almost an X-rated dance on her bed on Will Kincaid's channel. And also a bunch of the guys have seen more than that. So, okay, well, I'll just leave it at that, guys. So we're gonna focus. We're gonna focus on technical matters. All right. Just for the record, I've never had a relationship with a prostitute. Although in my casino days, I'd encounter them, and it's pretty scary. And I'll tell you why it's scary. And so in the casino world, you have what we call the advantage players and then the ploppies. The advantage players are very skilled gamblers. I considered myself an advantage players. They use their math skills to beat the casinos. And so that's kind of one class of people that go to casinos, one class of patrons. The other class are the ploppies, which is just the regular patrons. They're called ploppies because they just plop into the chairs at the slot machines or at the card tables and just kind of plop and get sawed to pieces by the casinos. So if you go to the casino, you want to be an advantage player, not a ploppy. Now, some advantage players, there are times when you have a lot of cash on you that makes you a serious target by a variety of bad actors. I've had friends that have, they're carrying $120,000 cash. Okay, so they've just won a ton of money at the blackjack tables, and they have stacks of purple chips. Purple chips are $500 each. The pumpkin colored chips are $1,000. So they have a mix of pumpkins and purples. And the black chips are $100 denominations. I mean, these guys have piles of money. I think the most cash I didn't gamble at those stakes, but that would have been fun. And I one time, won a lot of money, and I didn't have a lot of places to go. You're always on the run, so to speak, figuratively and literally. And I slept at a rest stop, and I didn't feel exactly comfortable having that much cash in my pocket. I mean, I was just tired. I had nowhere else to park. So there are ladies of the evening always. You're targeted because sometimes they're really not in it for an honest transaction, if you can call it that. And so word got around is, among the advantage players, it's like you do not let your guard down. She may proposition you, and then when you get into the room, there's her pimp or boyfriend waiting in the closet. He's going to threaten with you with a knife, and maybe if you're lucky, you just give up your money and you walk away at least alive. There's been some sad reports where some guys were really flaunting their money and they got murdered. So I mean, she's just the bait. She's just the bait in the trap, and they're going to just steal money. So one of the worst incidents I knew of was his name will not be named because this was on a private forum, but he's a famous gambler. He was part of a blackjack team, and he had lots of cash on him. I think it was in the safe, thankfully, but the lady of the evening poisoned his drink, and he passed out. She could not get to the money. The gentleman's teammate found him, passed out. They pumped his stomach, and he survived. And that wasn't too sharp, guy. If you're going to do something like that, and obviously if you're a Christian, you don't. But okay, so there are a lot of advantage players that are not Christians. Out there in Las Vegas, there are houses of ill repute that are at least controlled by law enforcement. Okay, so you hear stories like that. Even if you're tempted, that ought to scare the dickens out of you and shrivel up any of those nasty temptations really fast. So one time, I'm pretty sure, it's questionable if this is a lady of the evening, but I was at the blackjack table. I had a pile of chips in front of me, and some woman comes up and starts rubbing her breasts on my arm. And the first thing I do is I cover the chips, because I thought that was a move where she was going to try to grab my chips. Some of these guys that are kind of drunk, they're like, they think, hey, that's really cute. Some girl's coming on to you, and my spider sense said, this is bad news. I covered the chips, and there's surveillance cameras just looking. And if she tried to make a move on me, I'd probably call the pit boss or security. But it's just like trouble you don't want to deal with. So one time I was walking back. I'll never forget. It was at the Grand Victoria in Rising Sun, Indiana. And I was just headed back to my room, and there's this woman scantily dressed, and she said, "Hey, why don't you come to my room, and we could have a lot of fun." I don't remember what I said. I think I said, "No, thank you, ma'am," and I just walked. But I was upset because these guys could be in compromising positions, and all they want to do is just rob them. Won't be an honest transaction. I mean, not to mention this is immoral already, but I was very upset at all the danger there. Now I need to explain a little bit something about the casino administration. They have things called casino hosts. So if casino host is there to kind of make the patrons welcome. So you call the casino host and said, okay, we'll set you up in this room. You're a high roller. We'll give you a nice room for free. We'll give you free meals. Just let me schedule you. And they try to make sure you're all set up with all the amenities. So that's a casino host. So the next day, I was so upset by that incident. I said, what a guy wants, it's his, maybe immoral in God's eyes, but it's his business. I'm not going to stop him. But I just did not like the fact there are women right there soliciting business there, because you could imperil some of the patrons. This is dangerous. I mean, with that amount of cash, some guy gets lucky on a slot machine that night, he'd be a target. And there were incidents where people were stalking people who had big winnings in the slot machines, and they were getting mugged. So this was pretty scary. This is pretty scary. So I was so upset, and I was thinking about calling the police. I said, no, I don't think I need to escalate it that much. So let me do a little investigation. So I went. The next day, I visited a woman who was running the bar. She was the bartender, and I said, "Hey, Debbie, are there any prostitutes here?" Okay, you got to understand. I was asking because I wanted to find out if this really was a lady of the evening. And Debbie kind of whispers to me. She said, why don't you talk to the casino host? She'll set you up. It's like, no, that's not why I was asking. She just thought I was such a degenerate. Oh my goodness. It's just so funny. She said, talk to the casino host. She'll set you up. And then I found out, I did some more investigation. You could find out about it. Let me see if I could actually grab it here. Because the old Grand Victoria Casino, it's now been, the name has been changed. It's some sort of Rising Sun casino in Rising Sun, Indiana. About half an hour away is the Belterra. Okay, and let me see if I have the article here. See if I can find it. All right, so when I talked to Debbie, she did confirm that there was stuff going on. I also frequented the Belterra, although the Grand Victoria was my favorite in that part of Indiana. But let me just share this. It's so funny. So let me see. Okay. All right. Casino fined $2.26 million over allegations of prostitution. Indianapolis. Okay, this is in 2002. In Indianapolis, an Ohio River casino must pay $2.26 million fine and close for more than 2 days over allegations it entertained guests with prostitutes and money for gambling during a golf outing last year. So this was going on there. So, I mean, there are a few more encounters, but you just try to avoid. You get yourself in trouble. So anyway, that's just in case people were curious. That's you know, I did have one other time when I was going, my car broke down and had to retrieve it. I had to get to a bus station, a Greyhound station, because this place was so out in the nowhere. And I'm like, oh, it's kind of stingy. I didn't want to just take a taxi cab or whatever, because that would have cost hundreds and hundreds of dollars. And so I was out there in DC, Washington, DC, in the middle of the night, which probably wasn't the sharpest thing. It was kind of scary. And I thought, you know, I thought I saw some drug dealers with their ladies of the evening there. That was creepy. So that was the closest, and I don't want to go anywhere near that. You know, just it's a dangerous environment, and you don't know what you're gonna face. So guys, if you're Christians, you know that's off limits. If for those who are non-Christians, I think there are places of ill repute there that are at least controlled and monitored by law enforcement out there in Nevada. That's about all I'll say. You know, so I'll just leave it at that. I am concerned about safety. I just don't. You know, this is scary. So anyway, going back to our StupidWh0reEnergy, she raised this question. So going back to the topic at hand. So she raised this question on modern day debate. And there it is. That was the debate on June 25th. And it's gotten close to 13,000 views. And StupidWh0reEnergy, you could see the highlighted there. It's a little bit, see if I can increase it. What the comment was. Now, YouTube tries to translate voice into English, and it's not precise, but it says here, StupidWh0reEnergy says, the first genuine life emerged when a microsphere acquired double-stranded genes, which happened when an anticodon stem loop, tRNA, evolved through random process cell. So it says here, StupidWh0reEnergy says the first genuine life emerged when a microsphere acquired double-stranded genes, which happened when an anticodon stem loop, tRNA, evolved through random processes. Now, I gave a very short answer, and it wasn't the most precise. And I feel kind of bad that if I don't, you know, there are people that watch what I say, and being under the gun like that, sometimes you're not able to deliver the best answer you'd really like because you just don't have time. You don't have your textbooks open. You don't have your Google to check up references. And so you do the best that you can. So, let's try to walk through her question. So the first thing is microsphere. Now, unfortunately, I didn't have a chance to clarify what do you mean by microsphere. So if you Google microsphere and abiogenesis, you come across something by Sidney Fox. So let's just look at this. And I'm going to Google it. Microsphere abiogenesis. And it's a 1983 idea. Now, there have been since other microspheres that they've enclosed in some sort of some, I guess, spherical things. So I didn't have a chance to confirm what this meant. So let's just look at one of them here. Ancient microspheres, abiogenic, protobiogenic, or biogenic. And let's see what it's made of. It says here, criteria of biogenicity of microspheroidal objects which had been interpreted as microfossils are here reviewed in light of additional data. And that's it. We don't even know what these things are. And that's Fox's paper from 1983. And okay, so let's look at Sidney Fox's. He was a researcher. And let's look at spheres. Okay, so it says here, Sidney Fox, 1912 to 1998, was a Los Angeles-born biochemist responsible for discoveries on the origin of biological systems. Fox explored the synthesis of amino acids from inorganic molecules, the synthesis of proteinous amino acids and amino acid polymers called proteinoids from inorganic molecules and thermal energy, and created what he thought was the world's first protocell out of proteinoids and water. He called these globules microspheres. Microspheres. And by the way, thanks, Dustin, for nice to see you. Much love. Thumbs up and thumbs up, thumbs up. And Patrick Alexander said microsphere is way too generic a term. So StupidWh0reEnergy, who's has since my last broadcast has changed her handle. And I get that if you want to reinvent yourself, I'm sorry. And that's fine. But when StupidWh0reEnergy brought that up, it's like this is the best that I could find. So unless a specific paper was referenced, I'm just going with this definition, the microsphere. And after the debate, and I looked this up, I said, this is going to be pretty easy. There is a book, Mystery of Life's Origin. Let me show it to you. It's by Thaxton, Bradley, and Olson. So this was, I got to tell you a funny story. It went out of print, and for a while this book was retailing at like $1,000. I was lucky to get my copy. I got it at, like a $10 price or something, but it was really funny. They have since reprinted it. They also made it available online for free. You could look at the old version It's available for free online as a PDF. I just, as a public service, I'm just making you all aware of that. And let me show you the book. And this is going to relate to the microspheres. Mystery of Life's Origin by Walter Bradley, Charles Saxon, Roger Olson. I want to tell you, I had the privilege of finally meeting Walter Bradley this past January, 2022. And I thanked him personally. I thanked Walter Bradley personally for writing that book because it contributed to my return to the Christian faith. There are numerous people that had helped, like Fuzz Rana, Hugh Ross, Walter Bradley, Walter Brown, Walter Remine, so many others. But in that book, it talked about Sidney Fox's proteinoids. Proteinoids are not real proteins because they are first made with racemic amino acids. That means you have left and right. The bonds are not solely alpha peptide. They're also epsilon and some other kind of bond. That's bad. They're not necessary, it invites things other than polymerization. And a lot of these are only 15 residues. They use the word residue. You could use the word amino acid. You'll see it in the literature. They're about 15 residues long. Average protein size, according to P.Z. Myers, is something like 430 amino acids, in that ballpark. Topoisomerase being like 1,500, 1,600 long. We have Titan that could be like 30,000, and then we have some that are 50. The average is about 430. And so even, there's probably some that are really, really tiny. But 15, and they're not even homochiral, and they're not all alpha peptide bonds. You have these epsilon and other kinds of bonds. That's not even a protein. One of the problems is if it's not homochiral, you don't have stable folds, so you're not able to form alpha helices, which is a very important structural thing. Structural character, very important structure, building block. Alpha helices. And you also have beta barrels and stuff. I also think you can't create beta sheets, beta barrels, or anything like that unless it is homochiral. So so these things that aren't even proteins and they're just kind of just basically junked. What Fox did is he took amino acids paste from beans. I think they were beans. So he took biological material. He had to heat it to get it to polymerize, to fuse together. Now, the heating causes racemization. That means if it started in the L amino acid state, the heat, the high temperature causes it to become a mix of L and D, that is left-handed and right-handed. And so it was racemic, and then it connected. The connections were not all alpha peptide bonds. You had I think they were epsilon and sigma bonds. An organic chemist would understand what they were. And so then these things would aggregate and become globules, and he called them microspheres. So this thing, it doesn't resemble a cell at all. So you could see this innocent comment by, I think it was sincere and well-meaning. But this is what I call the problem with Brandolini's law. So StupidWh0reEnergy says the first genuine life emerged when a microsphere acquired double-stranded genes. So this, do you see how long it's taken just to uncoil? Just as a start. So if this were a debate, she could just throw that on the table, and it wasn't a debate. I wasn't debating her, I was debating someone else, but because she was confronting me in the side chat, she could just throw that out there, and it's taking me this long to kind of uncoil it just from a scientific standpoint. Because it's like, the audience will think, oh, microsphere, and then the guy JF, who is my counterpart, he was saying that's right. I'm just, he's an evolutionary biologist, and he was saying, that's right. I'm like, dude, you're an evolutionary biologist, you're a scientist, you need a little bit more critical thinking. And here you're a scientist, a PhD scientist, and you're going to affirm this. And we had to move on, and I couldn't call him out on this. I couldn't call him out on it. I said, okay, I respect that StupidWh0reEnergy is just, reading the literature and confronting me with it. But then a scientist of JF's caliber is going to affirm it as true. This is baloney. No way that's going to evolve into a cell. First off, the cell is enclosed not by proteinoids or proteins. It's enclosed by a lipid bilayer that may have some proteins in it. But the lipid bilayer is pretty important. It's not a protein sphere. It is a complex of phospholipids with proteins attached to it or through it. And I'm just like, yeah, no way a proteinoid is going to evolve into a cell. My understanding is, and it's been a while since I've read The Mystery of Life's Origin, those things dissolved. You throw water on it and it's gone. These are real little facts that can easily just kind of be lost, but they're pretty important. And it's irresponsible for these origin of life researchers. I say the whole field now is either delusional at best. At best, it's delusional. At worst, it's fraudulent, misleading, and dishonest. And then you have JF, an evolutionary biologist, saying that's right. I'm just like, say what? All right, so I'm going to give a little bit of allowance and say, oh, no, I meant a different microsphere. Okay. So did you mean a sphere that happened to be made of like a micelle that's made of lipids? Okay. The Discovery Institute put out a video that said, well, what ends up happening is then you've just built a nice tomb. Nothing can go in or out, and it's just going to die inside. If you take RNA, package it, put it in a sphere, there are no nutrients that can get in, no energy, and whatever energy is used, it's going to consume it, and it's going to convert to waste. It's going to just be dead. So you can either take Sidney Fox's definition of microsphere in terms of the proteinoids, or you could take this one that's just either a lipid monolayer or a bilayer, and it's some sort of vesicle, basically. I think that's the right term, vesicle. And then you put RNA in it, and then, so what did Miss Energy have to say? She said, the first life emerged when a microsphere acquired double-stranded genes, which happened when an anticodon stem loop tRNA evolved through random processes in the cell. So again, how's it going to evolve when you don't have any nutrients or energy to be driving this process? If it's in an enclosed microsphere without transmembrane proteins, remember the transmembrane proteins are these little gates that open and shut. They'll discriminate what can go in and out. It's just like a tomb. And I think I said in the debate, this thing's going to, first thing I pointed out, I said, this thing's not going to evolve. It's going to be basically dead. And I said, that's a testable prediction. So we could settle this and throw some RNAs inside a vesicle. You want proteinoids, try to shove some RNA inside a proteinoid globule of Sidney Fox, or try to do that with just a a lipid mono or bilayer and inject it, and you have this little sphere that's on the outside of lipids, and you have RNA in the middle. I predict it's not going to evolve into life, not unless you engineer it. And the RNAs, we know, decay. They have half-lives. To make matters even worse, it has a half-life. It's not going to stay in RNA. Whatever condition it might have been, it's going to degrade. So not to mention, you're assuming an RNA forms to begin with. And we covered the problems of forming an RNA in my talk a couple of days ago in my Get Well message to Rebecca. So this is problematic on so many points. And see, it's taken 20 minutes just to uncoil the problems with an innocent looking statement like that. And I don't fault StupidWh0reEnergy for saying this. She's just repeating what she hears. But I do fault Evolutionary Biologist, JF, who wrote a book on origin of life, and he said, this is right. And I'm just like, you got to be kidding, dude. And in the debate, I stood behind my friends, Change Laura Tan, and Rob Stadler, the book Stairway to Life. And there are other books on this that'll show why JF was wrong. So, Miss Energy, if you're listening, this is a more detailed thing. So now let's look at what specifically this. She mentioned anticodons and RNA. Let me see if I could show a little video here. She is referring the process of protein translation. So I believe I could get this a little bit backward. I'm pretty sure this yellow strand is the mRNA. So the DNA transcribes to RNA. The RNA now becomes a blueprint for the protein. And out here is this red thing is the protein that's being constructed one amino acid at a time. And these green blobs are the tRNA. And this blue thing here is the ribosome. So the tRNA cannot function by itself. It needs a strand of RNA that serves as the source of genetic material. And that means it has to have the right sequence. So it's ridiculous to assume this could happen as a random process, because a random RNA string will make random polypeptides, which are just basically junk proteins that don't do anything. It's too improbable. And like, what sort of proteins would I be talking about? Oh, how about, you've heard me mention it, how about a polymerase or a helicase? All the loaders and breakers and all the assembly stuff needed for that. And how about transmembrane proteins? These cannot be random. And I can make that argument. In fact, I'm presenting that argument at the Creation Research Society. And I don't need to present at the Creation Research Society. This should be just like really well known. And that's a whole nother topic, but it cannot be random and make life cellular life. The abiogenesis researchers will insist, oh no, it doesn't have to be all at once. It happens gradually. You see, that's an assertion without proof. Do they have any example where it happens gradually, where you take a little piece of this and it starts to, you put it in a pool and it starts to assemble into a cell? It's like, no. What's the proof of this? You can take a living cell, poke it, let all its guts spill out, and throw it in a test tube and mix. In that one experiment, you'll have some pretty high quality, maybe higher quality than all of the origin of life research experiments put together. It'll be all concentrated but it still cannot self-assemble into a cell. And so the origin of life researchers will say, well, no, it's that you're comparing this to the modern cell. It was something different. And it's like, okay, that's fine. Why don't you describe what it actually looked like rather than making vague appeals? Because vague appeals are just speculations and you could be dead wrong. What's the probability? I mean, if you can't even describe what it looks like, how can you possibly assert that it happened in gradual steps when you don't even know what the starting point is or nor what the intermediate steps are? That is not science. That's speculation and faith pretending to be science. You can believe it, but you can't represent it as scientific truth. It's just an assumption. It's just an unproven assumption. So that's usually the counter. But anyway, let's go back to this diagram and we'll highlight what Miss Energy was talking about. So let's show here. So again, I think this is the mRNA. These are the tRNA. tRNA is transfer RNA. mRNA is messenger RNA. So this is the messenger RNA, the mRNA that has the gene, basically the gene there, or template of the gene. The tRNAs are green, and the blue is the ribosome, and then the red is the protein. Let me see if I could just play a little bit. Okay, so this gene here, again, it's the RNA copy of the gene to be specific. And it reads 3 bases at a time, and that's what they call a codon. And then the correct tRNA has a matching template. And it's a little difficult to explain in this short space, but let me see if I could just show, see if I have a picture here. Let me make this a little bigger. You see, this is the mRNA, which is the copy of the gene in RNA. And you have 3 nucleotides. The nucleotides are the letter in the alphabet A, C, T, G, adenine, cytosine, thymine, guanine, but thymine is converted to uracil. So adenine, cytosine, uracil, guanine. Okay. ACUG in RNA language. And when you get 3 of them together, that's what they call a codon. And there is a tRNA here. So connected to the tRNA is an amino acid, and the tRNA will somehow, the ribosome will find it, will shuttle it to the mRNA. And there's some sort of sorting process where the right tRNA is going to match with the codon here. So let me try to show what this is. This is the genetic code. And I'm just blasting through this, so if it sounds confusing, I'm sorry. It's because I'm trying to be brief. But some of you already know what I'm talking about, and you could probably express it better. So you have these letters here, and when you get 3 together, that's a codon, and the codon will translate to these various amino acids like PHE, which is phenylalanine, LEU is leucine, ILE is isoleucine, MET is methionine, VAL is valine, SIR is serine, PRO is proline, THR is threonine, that's alanine, tyrosine, histidine, glutamine, asparagine, lysine, aspartic acid, glutamate, I think, cysteine, tryptophan, arginine, serine, arginine, glycine. And so, let me go back here. I'm going to delete some of these here. Going back to the video, right here. So you have these three things here, these three nucleotides, and so you just group the gene into groups of three, and there'll be a variety of letters, and the letters will correspond to an amino acid according to this table. And so basically the mRNA serves as a blueprint for the protein. You see that? And what makes that possible is this tRNA here. But the right tRNA, it basically implements this alphabet. You have a variety of tRNAs that will implement this alphabet. And the right tRNA, it's like a, for lack of a better word, it's like kind of a lock and matching key. So you have different kinds of tRNAs, and they'll connect to a specific amino acid, and the tRNA will recognize these different codes or codons. So you have a tRNA that will recognize like UUU. Maybe another one will recognize CAA, etc. And so StupidWh0reEnergy, and worse, Evolutionary Biologist JF, we're saying this emerges randomly. I'm just like, no way. No way that's going to emerge randomly. There are all sorts of biochemical pathways to synthesize these things, not to mention one needs a pre-existing genome to be able to make tRNAs to begin with. Also, pre-existing genome to start making the right kind of amino acids and all sorts of chemical processes to make this. And then you need to have a ribosome that will coordinate the movement of this mRNA going through the machine, and the tRNA is getting there. This is just ridiculous to say this could happen by random processes, but nonetheless, that's what Miss Energy is asserting, and I don't fault her for that. But I do fault JF, who's a scientist, saying this is how it happened. And he's just dead wrong. So this word anticodon here, I'm just going to, this anticodon stem loop, let me just show it to you in the diagram. This is the anticodon stem loop right here. That's what they're talking about. Just the part that connects to the messenger RNA. It's called an anticodon stem loop. Let me see if I have a picture of that. All right, so this is a little bit more detailed. This is the part that recognizes the mRNA here, and that's the anticodon stem loop. So you can see this loop here. It's kind of a loop structure, and it's kind of at the stem. That's all she's referring to. Yeah, emerge randomly is just dumbassery. Sorry, but that is what it is. Yes, so I don't fault Miss Energy so much as I do fault a culture that's represented by JF that can just assert this. I mean, do you have, I mean, I'm sorry to get a little exercise here. Do you guys have any experiments that can prove this? I mean, experiments that don't have tons of human interference to make it possible? I mean, how can you just blatantly say that in a debate across me and kind of dismiss me? And you wouldn't stand up to a molecular biologist that is trying to be impartial and accurate. You know, the only way you'll get away with that is people are sympathetic to your position, but nothing Nothing in textbook chemistry, biochemistry says this is, or cellular biology or whatever, says this is feasible. And you certainly don't have experiments that are truly random. I mean, anything that might even resemble this would have to have a lot of human interference. And I covered this in the show, The Hand of God Dilemma, because to kind of make advancements to promote the idea that you actually discovered something, you have to kind of cheat and use a lot of human interference that is not natural. It's highly intelligent, well-designed, carefully orchestrated. And then you're going to represent this as what happens naturally. That's delusional at best. It's misleading, it's dishonest, and fraudulent at worst. And I hate to use those words, but what are we going to call this? What are we going to call this? So again, I've taken about 40 minutes to just walk through some of this. And so this is Brandolini's law, that someone can come on modern day debate just spend not even a minute, 30 seconds, and just spew this out. And it takes at least 40 minutes to start to debunk it accurately from textbook science. And so that's what they call Brandolini's law. And maybe it's, we saw it with Dave Farina. Let me see, Brandolini's law. Just for the sake of completeness, let me talk about Brandolini's law. I'll refer to it. This Brandolini's law, also known as the BS asymmetry principle, is an internet adage that emphasizes the effort of debunking misinformation in comparison to the relative ease of creating it in the first place. It states the amount of energy needed to refute BS is an order of magnitude larger than needed to produce it. So how did we get Brandolini's law? It was publicly formulated for the first time in January 2013 by Alberto Brandolini, an Italian programmer. Brandolini stated that he was inspired by reading Daniel Kahneman's Thinking, Fast and Slow right before watching an Italian political talk show with journalist Marco Travaglio and former Prime Minister Silvestro Berlusconi attacking each other. So you can read about it. So this played out. Some of you who watched the exchange between James Tour and Dave Farina took Dave FumbDuck Farina to spew out 20 minutes of total garbage. It took a world-class chemist 10 hours on air, 13-part series. He said it was 10 parts, but it was really like 13 parts, to thoroughly demolish it, every falsehood. And James Tour is saying it's like every 30 seconds or just about every word he could probably get, Farina could hardly get through one sentence without saying something wrong. I mean, Tour said something to that effect. I don't know exactly what he said, but he's just like, he couldn't believe it. So an example is Farina said, it's easy to make any biomolecule. I'm just like, yeah, right. Everyone with any serious biochemistry background knew that was a laughable statement. It was ridiculous. And Farina was getting away with this, and it took James Tour an hour or so to show just how difficult it is to make even simple biomolecules, not even the more complex ones that you see in living organisms. And so Farina was just pumping out all this BS, all this doo-doo, and a world-class chemist was taking hours to clean up that mess. It was terrible. And that's Brandolini's law. That's why debates don't settle things. They're maybe good for marketing, but that's about it. Because the other side, who may be dealing with an audience that doesn't, is not acquainted with all the facts, will just buy all the BS that is being fed them. They don't have time to go through it like what we're doing here, because especially on technical stuff like this, it's not easy. So let's see what else is on the docket. I'm going to try to wrap this up. We'll see if I can actually, when I say I'm going to wrap it up, I actually do. I mentioned that, let me see here. She's traced my writings all the way back to 2003. Goodness, this is 19 years ago. And she's read all sorts of articles that I've written, and et cetera, et cetera. And then she'll confront me in these debates through the side chat. There's some question about her identity, and Cheryl gave an interesting anecdote about Miss Energy. I don't know what to believe anymore. Okay. As far as what goes on the internet, meet someone in person, you're dealing with a known entity. I've had people on this show that I've met in person, like Dr. Sandy Pigeon, some other people. So, when you're dealing with people that are known, is a different story. So anyway, Miss Energy has donated hundreds of dollars to the creation evolution debate, and for that I'm grateful. And it wasn't just for debates that involved me, but others. But she's been very generous whenever I show up. I usually get at least 3 questions and 3 super chats for her donations. And I still remember from my debate with Dr. Dan, she just threw something out of the blue about beta barrel evolution. And of course, it was just kind of like this. After the debate, I just said, I'm sorry, Miss Energy, I don't really, that's not anything I'm familiar with. So that little tactic is just to kind of just say, oh, Sal doesn't know anything. Anyone can do that. All they have to do is just randomly go through biology and say, do you know that? Do you know that? Do you know that? Of course, she was just donating to James, modern day debate. And I said, well, if your goal was to kind of make me, look bad, I'm happy to oblige, thank you for your super chat. So, she got her thrills that way, but it didn't move the scientific discussion substantially forward. So then I looked about the paper she cited on beta barrels, and just like, it's the same recycled speculations. There was an experiment associated with it, but it wasn't relevant. I've since forgotten all the details, but it's easily refutable, kind of just if you just walk through it like we did here tonight. So I claim that evolutionary biologists have been doing a lot of Brandolini's law in their practice. I'm going to give some specific examples. Ohno's 1984 paper on the evolution of new proteins, specifically the NylB protein, where supposedly bacteria evolved the ability to degrade and digest nylon. Nylon was invented in 1935, and I was in a classroom where I talked about this. I gave a presentation. Some of the postdocs were dismissive, and I was kind of upset at them because they didn't even listen to what I said. They said, "Oh, it couldn't possibly digest nylon because nylon wasn't invented until 1935, so it had to acquire that ability after 1935." Well, turns out even humans and pigs have a particular protein enzyme called trypsin. It can degrade nylon, very similar to the NylB. It's a different mechanism, but it can degrade it and then hypothetically digest it. Because what was at issue was something that could break down nylon. No one's going to argue that pigs and humans independently evolved this since 1935. And I have evolutionary biologists now backing me on this. They thought I was out of my mind, but they're like, okay, when I presented the evidence, they had to back down. You could easily go to Uniprot, and I've released papers on this. So it's effectively, I mean, we had Ken Miller, who appeared in the infamous Kitzmiller versus Dover trial over intelligent design. And even though he didn't present this at the trial, he went on a speaking tour promoting evolution, and he cited this example, and it wasn't true. But how long did it take to refute this? 35 years. Dr. Sanford and I think, probably wrote the most comprehensive review of this, and we just obliterated it. Other people, to their credit, like Ann Gager and Doug Axe and Don Batten and some others, refuted it. Some didn't do it quite so successfully, but they built the foundation that we could finally refute it. And an editor, this editor-in-chief of Cell Reports, Steve Matheson, said Ohno was wrong. I'm just like, it's taken 35 years. 35 years to clean up that BS, and people have been saying this is evidence. The National Center for Cellular Evolution, that's the NCSE, National Center for Science Education, NCSE. We call it the National Center for Cellular Evolution. They wrote this article based on that. Let me just show it to you. It's still on their website. I hope they don't take it down, because it's testament to how bad evolutionary biology is. New proteins without God's help. Creationists seem to be proud of their calculations that supposedly show how their thermodynamics and probability prevent the transformation of biologically useful macromolecules such as enzymes. The evidence usually consists of quotations from such authors as Hubert Yockey, who agrees that catalytically active proteins cannot occur by chance. Looking at fully evolved proteins says that their information content is too high for their chance formations. Creationists do their own calculations to show that the transformation of biologically useful proteins is impossible. The calculations almost involve the erroneous assumption that each of the many amino acid positions in a protein must be filled by the one particular amino acid suitable for that position. Since there are 20 different amino acids available for each position, the chance of randomly getting a string of 200 amino acids all in the right order is 1 divided by 20 to the 200th power. If you plug this expression into a calculator, it will tell you that it equals essentially 0. Thus, the creationists say you can't get such a protein. Are we still connected? Okay. Thus, the creationists say you can't get such a protein by chance ordering of amino acids. As Duane Gish of the Institute of Creation Research put it in 1976, the time required for a single catalytically active protein molecule to arise by pure chance would be billions of times the assumed age of the Earth. And then they go on to say, now it has happened. Not one, but 2 new proteins have been discovered. In all probability, new proteins are forming by this process all the time, but it seems to be the first documentation of this phenomenon. The newly discovered proteins are enzymes that break down the byproducts, some of the byproducts produced during nylon manufacture. Since nylon first came into commercial production in 1940, we know that the new enzymes have formed since that time. We know, so they say, we know that the enzymes have formed since that time. And I got to tell you, that is an assumption. This is almost as ridiculous as saying rocks had to evolve the capability of breaking car windows. They had to evolve that ability only after car windows came into existence. That's a ridiculous statement. It's entirely possible these enzymes existed, and when nylon arrived on the scene, then the enzyme just happened to also have the ability to break that down. And I worked with biochemist Joe DeWeese, and I said, "You look at this." He said, "Oh, that's easy. That's an amidase bond. It looks like, you know, your typical peptide bond. It's no wonder it could break it down. You know, a peptidase. I'm sorry, it was an amide bond. I'm sorry, amide bond. It's an amide bond. It can be broken down by an amidase, a peptidase. It's an amide bond that looks like a peptide bond. So check that. And we can confirm it also in a variety of ways. We have fruit plants that can do this. We have homology, the trypsin, which is a mammalian thing. Did trypsin suddenly emerge in all the lines to help us degrade nylon? I mean, you know, we certainly don't live solely off of nylon like some of these bacteria that they were examining. But this myth had been circulating. See, the NCSE sounded so authoritative. And then you had an Ivy League professor and Ken Miller just going on a speaking tour. And then Dennis Venema in 2016, 2017 says this is his favorite example of evolution. All this got blown away. They can't get their story right. See, they were repeating a falsehood even when in the literature, if they'd looked a little more carefully, it was already refuted. But, you know, the narrative, the momentum to keep a certain narrative caused really sloppy science, because by about 1992, all this was all falsified. Maybe it was buried in obscure papers that no one bothered to read, but it was already falsified. Dr. Sanford and I went into the archives, looked at it. We went also into the gene banks, protein banks, and we could see that this protein had existed. It's ancient, even by evolutionary standards. One researcher by the name of Tetsuya Yomo, Yomo, said that this thing was ancient like by about 140 million years. So even by mainstream standards, not young earth creationist standards, this had been around long before 1940, 1935, and yet the NCSE has not fixed this. This is an example of evolutionary biology using Brandolini's law. So what else do we have? I mean, you see the damage that has been done? They are promoting evolutionary theory and the ease of making new proteins with this falsehood. So let's go look at another. What's another example? And I've covered this on my channel. What's another one? Within this month or two, the ratio of non-synonymous to synonymous mutational changes, it was assumed to be that the synonymous changes, Ks, was neutral. So they assumed Ks, the ratio of non-synonymous to synonymous changes with Ks assumed neutral. You come up with these thousands of papers that predict theories about the strength of natural selection. An experiment published in the prestigious scientific journal Nature refuted that in the last 2 months. Thousands of papers were wrong. It's like, that's poetic justice. Another example of Brandolini's law. You come up with a BS idea, it propagates, people latch onto it. it just perpetuates for several decades. And I don't know how long this formulation's been around. I'm going to guess maybe 60 years. And then it gets blown out of the water by one experiment. This is what I call, Huxley called it the tragedy of science. A single ugly fact can destroy an otherwise beautiful theory. Gone. But how long did it take? Took 35 years to refute Ohno, say 50, 60 years to refute this Ka-Ks ratio. Dan Graur in 2012, he said if ENCODE is right, then evolution is wrong. This whole idea of junk DNA, again by Ohno, way back in the mid-80s, maybe a little earlier than that, maybe the late 70s, said, since we obviously evolved, most of our, because of this thing called mutational load, and I did a show on this, several shows. The most recent one is genetic entropy 2.0 versus 1.0, something like that. It was like within the last month. You could see where I kind of outlined the problem. It's called mutational load. They said since evolution is true, and humans have a certain limited reproduction rate, meaning only a certain number of kids a couple can make, especially the female. And the number of mutations that would happen if our genome is mostly functional, we have to assume that the genome is mostly junk, mostly being like 90%, 95%, who knows what the number is. And that's been blown away. We're finding that a lot of the DNA is pretty important. It's useful. Even in the mice, even in the humble mouse, and Sternberg pointed this out, in the eye cells, in the lens cells of the mouse, the DNA is reorganized to get the photons to focus. And like, if this were a random process, you couldn't do it. There's an article on that. I've also covered the fact that the DNA codes for RNAs that are create these membrane-less organelles, and the sequence is important for positioning the RNA, the ribonucleoproteins, the RNA plus proteins in various positions inside the cell. So the sequence is important. The fact it's there. There's also flip-ons in the RNA, in the DNA. These flip-ons, I covered that here. The DNA also serves as locations with the chromatin for molecular machines that do regulation, etc., to park. And so this is just being blown away. Again, Brandolini's law. They'll just say something and it takes decades to refute it. Decades. Francisco Ayala said ALU elements, which are repetitive elements, unique to primates. He said that was a stupid design. If there's a God, he's incompetent. His stuff was falsified almost the year he published that, in 2010 or so. We have like the RNA epitranscriptome, A to I editing, etc. We show, and there are other things with that tied to the flip-on idea. It's really bad science, but again, Brandolini's law plays out again. So Ayala made that assertion, and that was an assertion by evolutionary biologists. The ALU DNA sequences are junk, and that's been repeated for decades. It's getting refuted. It takes decades to refute. So when we talked about Brandolini's law as far as debate, sometimes we're just talking about like a few minutes of BS. It might take hours to refute. In the case of evolutionary biologists, they'll spew a little bit of BS in a paper. It takes decades to refute. Coyne, he repeated something in his book, Why Evolution is True. The more appropriate title is Why Evolutionary Biologists Are Deluded to Think It's True. That'd be more accurate. In his book, he cited the supposed backward wiring of the retina, saying no engineer would build that, and that's false. Physicists realize these are waveguides for electromagnetic waves. Uh, let me see if I could find the article. Okay, I wrote on July 24th. Oh yeah, this is me. I made a nasty comment about Jerry Coyne. Jerry Coyne, evolutionary biologist. And I said, you can see here, I wrote this in 2014, July 24th. Coyne is not an engineer. He's sort of a glorified fruit fly farmer. I know that's so mean. Jerry Coyne got his fame because he farmed fruit fly. He farmed fruit flies in his lab. Farmed fruit flies. That's a tongue twister. Farmed fruit flies in his lab to do evolution experiments and trying to prove evolution is true. So I say he's a glorified fruit fly farmer. He's a glorified fruit fly farmer. He doesn't have engineering insights, and it shows. He's also one of the most militant ideologues out there, protesting the appointment of Francis Collins, MD, PhD, as head of the NIH, because Collins was a Christian. Jerry Coyne argues the human eye is poorly designed. He says, the human eye, though eminently functional, is imperfect. Certainly not the sort of eye an engineer would create from scratch. The nerves and blood vessels that attach to our photoreceptor cells are on the inside rather than the outside of the eye, running over the surface of the retina. The whole system is like a car, which all the wires into the dashboard hang inside the driver's compartment. But he was wrong. On physics.org, it says here, having the photoreceptors at the back of the retina is not a design constraint. It is a design feature. It is a design feature. The idea that the vertebrate eye, like the traditional front illuminated camera, might have been improved somehow if it had only been able to orient its wiring behind the photoreceptor layer like the cephalopod is folly. Fiber optic light pipes. Okay, so you can actually go, let me see if I could find this. It might be worth going to see how the physicists describe this. Fiber optic light pipes in the retina do much more than simple image transfer. Okay, so I just read the first sentence. The idea that the vertebrate eye, like a traditional front illuminated camera, might have been improved somehow if it had only been able to orient its wiring behind the photoreceptor layer like a cephalopod is folly. So they're saying what Coyne is saying is folly. Coyne and everyone else who said this is bad engineering, that's folly. These physicists are pointing this out. And here is why. Here is why. Indeed, in simply engineered systems like CMOS or CCD image sensors, a back illuminated design manufactured by flipping the silicon wafer and thinning it so that light hits the photocathode without having to navigate the wiring layer can improve photon capture across a wide wavelength band. But real eyes are much more crafty than that. But real eyes are much more crafty than that. That means much more sophisticated, much more technologically advanced. A case in point are the Muller glia cells that span the thickness of the retina. These high refractive index cells spread in an absorptive canopy across the retinal surface and then shepherd photons through a low scattering cytoplasm to separate receivers, much like coins through a change sorting machine. A new paper in Nature Communications describes how these wavelength dependent wave guides can shuttle green-red light to cones while passing the blue purples to adjacent rods. The idea that these Muller cells act as living fiber optic cables has been floated previously. It has been convincingly demonstrated using a dual beam laser trap. In this case, this, like in Java programming, meaning the paper just brought up, the authors couch this feat as mere image transfer with the goal of just being to bring light in with minimal distortion. So take that, Jerry Coyne. Take that, evolutionary biologist. You add no. Can you guys get anything of significance right? Come on. This is terrible. So you've been spewing garbage and misleading the population with junk arguments like this, stuff you don't know what you're talking about, and it just persists. That's Brandolini's law on a large scale. And how many decades has it taken to refute this? Because this argument's been floating around a long time. Why was it finally refuted? Because we actually have engineers that now actually have the skills to understand what's going on. Yeah, you needed physicists with lasers, understanding of optics, refractive indices, and also waveguides. When I shared this with someone who actually does research on waveguides for a living, he said this is really hard to build a waveguide. An electromagnetic waveguide is tough stuff. To get this right, it needs to be exact. So let me see if I can actually find. But this is why I get exercise. They could just spew a little BS and it lasts for decades. And it takes the scientific enterprise to come up and clean it up. And of course, they'll say, this is how science works. Well, at this rate, with the way science is cleaning up evolutionary biology, there's not going to be a discipline left. It's becoming a farce at this point. So let's just share what a waveguide is. And this is probably like the last example. And I got to take, 20 years ago, the evolutionary biologists would say, Sal, you're an engineer, butt out. You'd have no business in this. You see, this is changing now because engineers have the right skill set to understand many things in biology. They're very good. They're a lot better than biologists at understanding photonics and electromagnetic theory, geometric optics, etc. What kind of skill set does someone, all they can do is make phylogenetic diagrams of ancient species, and it's probably wrong anyway, and there's no way of testing it to prove it. Whereas engineering principles, you can test. You can test if the structure is really needed to affect the movement of photons through the eye. You can't test these phylogenetic trees that try to reconstruct the past. You have no way of knowing if it's accurate. You're just guessing, and it's usually through circular reasoning that they'll assert that it's correct. But let's even grant for the sake of argument it was reasonably accurate. It's not a useful skill. Your phylogenetic diagrams and reconstructions aren't going to explain the structure of the eye and why it has to be built a certain way. And they got it totally wrong. It doesn't surprise me Jerry Coyne got this wrong. And it's really the biologists before him, the evolutionary biologists before him, that were giving him that argument. I don't know where it came from. But let's go again to the waveguide. See, again, this is Brandolini's law. Look how much effort it's going to take to refute this BS. Thankfully, the scientists, God bless them, have already done this, but I'm just going to show you how difficult this is. So let's go here. A waveguide is a structure that guides waves such as electromagnetic waves or sound with minimal loss of energy by restricting the transmission of energy to one direction. Without the physical constraint of a waveguide, wave intensities decrease according to the inverse square law as they expand into three-dimensional space. So let me just read this a little farther. Here's an example of a waveguide. You could see kind of the opening here. And so the wave is going to travel This looks like a microwave. It looks big enough to guide a microwave through a pipe. A microwave engineer might cringe. So that would be centimeter. If that's centimeter, I don't know if that would qualify as a microwave. It's a small band. Let's look at optical waveguides. An example of an optical waveguide is an optical fiber. So in the radio frequency, you'd have a structure like this to make a waveguide. But what they were pointing out is those cells that Jerry Coyne were saying were stupid to be put there. They're actually really important. They're refracting. They're separating out the red colors from the other colors, and the red colors would go to some parts of the eye, and the other colors go to another part, and then it can sense it, and it does it with minimal distortion. This was highly sophisticated, and let's see what it had to say. Let's go back to the article here. A case in point are the Muller glia cells that span the thickness of the retina. These high refractive index cells. Oh, that's another thing. How do you make cells that have the right index of refraction? I mean, that is like non-trivial. These high refractive index cells spread an absorptive canopy across the retinal surface and then shepherd photons through a low scattering cytoplasm to separate receivers, much like coins through a change sorting machine. Real eyes are much more crafty than that. And so the problem with the Jerry Coynes of the world is that they're so quick to assume that since engineers are not able to do this, don't do things like that, that it must be badly designed. The real problem was engineers were not sophisticated enough yet to build things this crafty. It's very difficult. I shared this with an engineer who builds waveguides as a profession, and he was like, wow. When he read that description, he said, that's really hard to do. I'm like, yeah. There are lots of things in biology that are extreme limit of physics that we can't do right now. And I've talked to radar engineers that, I said, okay, the shark can sense nanovolts per meter in voltage, electric field strengths. He said, that's about the limit. I got the look like, I don't know that we could build anything that could sense that sensitively. We could say the same for magnetic fields. This is incredible. So this is kind of my tirade about Brandolini's law. I've given you examples where it's taken decades to refute it. I'm grateful that I was able to engage the comment by Miss Energy. I was about to call her stupid whore. By Miss Energy. I was able to engage it and I think successfully refute it in less than an hour. But there's some things that the evolutionary biologists say it's going to just take decades, and I don't know what other garbage has come out. It's very difficult to refute some of it, and I haven't, we're beginning to make dents into it, but there's still a lot that it's just going to take time to overcome in God's grace. So let me just see if I have anything else. So I was only able to cover just one of Miss Energy's questions. I actually was hoping Miss Energy would show up and make a little donation. So I enabled super chats in case she wanted to make a donation. I don't like collecting them because YouTube, so if you donate $100, YouTube will just run away with $30 and only $70 gets to me, maybe only even 60. That's just the way it works. And so for the most time, I've disabled it. I might disable it again, but we'll just see. So the question, would you debate StupidWh0reEnergy in modern day debate or anywhere else? Would be interesting. I don't know that I would want to, for the simple reason of Brandolini's law. Yeah, let's go Brandolini. So she could just, can you imagine what that would be like? She would just throw out something that takes her only 1 minute to say. It would take me an hour. And then James will come in and say, Sal, your time's up, after I've only spoken 10 minutes or even 5 minutes. This would be quite unfair. So the only way that the debate could move forward is we have a timed segments like I did with James Downard, where I just speak for 10 minutes, he speaks for 10 minutes. And I pretty much have to ignore any of the BS he has to say because it's going to take too long to uncoil. And then he's going to say, you never addressed my points. I'll say, sorry, you have to go to my channel to hear how I address them because it's going to be too long and you're leveraging Brandolini's law. So that's something what I might say. So maybe if anything, one of the takeaways from this is debates are not a very good way to arrive at the truth because of Brandolini's law. It might be a way to kind of present both sides kind of from a superficial level. Each side presents its claims, or dare I say false claims, for at least one side. And it would leave it to the viewers to see if they want to investigate more. So then I could make a claim and say that was false. It's too difficult to get into it right now, but you can find it elsewhere, and that can be verified. And sometimes that's why I made some of these shows so that I could confidently say, go to my channel and you'll see some of this. Maybe I didn't say it in the most succinct and clear way, but at least I'll give you the pointers and the appropriate papers. And I did these time segments, and that ended up being a very good debate policy. People have said my best debate with James Downard, and I'll put it in the link here. It had these time segments, and so you know, there was a lot of tricks he couldn't pull because it was a timed debate. So I think I'll find it here just briefly under debates. I'll give you the debate. One moment. And I'm going to dump it in the side chat. A link to that. That was me and James Downard. Memorial Day weekend. One moment. So there you go. Let me just look through the side chat. We have Cheryl here. And we have Brian Stevens and Cram. We have Jesus Garcia. Yeah, I covered Brandolini's law here. By the way, Jesus, you're a big boxing fan. I was watching Roy Jones Jr. I also saw some boxing between Roberto Duran. Some great fights. Tommy the Terminator Hearns versus Roberto Duran were some other great fights. There were some great fights there. So you come to mind sometimes when I watch. I do have a fondness for boxing, unfortunately. Still one of my favorites was Oscar de la Hoya versus Ricardo Mayorga. Oh my goodness, that's one of my favorites. The other being Buster Douglas versus Mike Tyson. Yeah, Mike Tyson got knocked out. That was one of my favorites. And Mr. J, always great to see you. Jesus Garcia. Oh, Kinetic. I don't know if we've ever made the acquaintance. I don't know that I've ever seen you. Patrick Alexander. And I know I may miss someone. Janet Duttridge was here earlier, but I think I scared her away once I started to go into the molecular biology. And Jamie Russell was here. There you go. So thank you everyone for joining. I'm gonna now try to wrap up the show here. I'm gonna get the end credits going. 1 second. I'm gonna have to delete some of my windows. It behaves differently when I have so many windows open. So apologies, everyone. And so I'm going to share the end credits. So I really want to thank everyone for joining. And oh, really? Am I? Well, we'll let that rumor float around a little longer. There are a lot of no, I'm not engaged. I am very, very busy. I may be relocating temporarily. That's probably where that rumor circulated. I mean, I've just been crazy busy trying to get ready to, I'll still keep this house, but I have to prepare it for when I'm absent for a little bit. So whoever came up with that rumor, thank you. I think that's kind of cute. So I was some years ago, I had asked someone and she said no, and then she changed her mind. And by the time she changed her mind and wanted to marry me, I had already changed mine. That was so sad. She and I are still friends, but we just had different paths in life. And it's really sad. We live in a fallen world, and it'd be nice if all of us could live happily ever after. So that's still a nice rumor. So anyway, let me finish out the closing credits. And thank you all for joining me on this show. And take care, and God bless you.